You want to know what franchise hasn't been getting enough love lately? Donkey Kong. Without Donkey Kong, Nintendo wouldn't be the video game giant we know it as today, but nowadays, it seems like Nintendo is doing whatever they can to ignore this franchise as much as humanly possible. And it's a shame because Donkey Kong actually has a lot of really cool games under his belt, and some of those games just so happen to be some of the greatest platformers of all time. I'm of course talking about Donkey Kong Country. Whenever people talk about 2D platformers, they usually talk about the Super Mario games, but for me, Donkey Kong Country is where it's at. These are some of the most insanely fun and creative platformers I've ever played. Even the older games have a certain charm to them that makes them so enjoyable to play through. So, since Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is releasing soon, I wanted to replay through the entire Donkey Kong Country series and rank all of the games from worst to best. This list will be based on how fun the games are and any unique features they may have. Also, each of these games have gotten either a port or a remaster at some point, and I may touch on those briefly, but I'll mostly just be talking about the original releases. So without further ado, let's go! Let's take a trip back to 1994, back when the Super Nintendo was riding high, and we saw the release of the very first game in the series, Donkey Kong Country. And in my opinion, this is definitely the weakest game in the series. That doesn't mean it's a bad game, not at all. The original Donkey Kong Country still holds up really well. This was the game that completely redefined Donkey Kong into what he is today. It brought us to the whole new world of Donkey Kong Island. It introduced a ton of new characters like Cranky Kong, Funky Kong, Candy Kong, and Donkey Kong's new partner, Diddy Kong. We also got introduced to the Kremlings and their leader King K. Rool, who have stolen Donkey Kong's banana hoard, so it's up to DK and Diddy Kong to get it back. You travel around Donkey Kong Island and play through a handful of levels in each area before partaking in a boss battle. On the surface, this may look like a pretty standard 2D platformer, but this game actually did a lot to stand out to other comparable games. First off, the sprite art is absolutely incredible. The amount of detail that went into the environments and animations is truly remarkable. The levels in this game are really fun to play through. You get to swing off vines, use barrel cannons to blast across the stage, and ride around in minecarts. Some of the levels even have animal buddies that you can ride on, like a rhino, a frog, and a swordfish, all of which offer unique gameplay styles to really spice up the action. Plus, this game offers two-player multiplayer modes, which is a feature that all of the other games in the series would implement as well. Now, all of this is great stuff. However, I do have some problems with the first Donkey Kong Country. Even though I really like the levels in this game, they definitely feel the least refined out of the entire series. There were so many moments where the level design felt unfair, or I died from an enemy and it's like, how the hell was I supposed to see that coming? On top of that, the boss fights are stupidly easy. Even the final boss wasn't that tricky, and most of the collectibles like the Kong letters and the animal tokens honestly feel pretty pointless. Donkey Kong Country isn't perfect by a long shot, but I still had a ton of fun playing through it. This game does so much right, and without it, we wouldn't have Donkey Kong for what he is today. Whenever I hear people talk about Donkey Kong Country, I almost never hear them talk about the next game on this list, and that's probably because it's arguably the most forgettable game in the series, and that game is Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. I don't know why this game needed such a long subtitle, but whatever. Donkey Kong Country 3 is a good game. Hell, I'd even consider it a great game, but for me, this felt like a bit of a step down from Country 2. In this game, you play as Dixie Kong and her cousin, Kitty Kong. I don't know what it is, but I don't really like Kitty Kong. Something about him just rubs me the wrong way. But anyways, Donkey Kong Country 3 actually switches things up in a couple cool ways. Unlike the previous two games where it was basically just a straight line through all the levels, this game lets you openly explore this world map using a boat, and by completing parts of the world, you can earn upgrades for your boat to explore new parts of the world. Admittedly, this isn't that much different than before, but it does make the game feel like more of an adventure. Once again, we have a huge selection of levels to play through, but if I'm being honest, the stages here are a bit boring? I'm not saying they're bad, far from it. These levels are expertly designed and can have a lot of cool ideas, like this one where you're being chased by a saw, one with ghost barrels that fade in and out, or this one where you swim in poison and your left and right movements are flipped. But aside from those few new ideas, the levels feel very generic and not as unique as the ones in Donkey Kong Country 2. There are these bear brothers that you can buy random junk from. I'm sorry, I genuinely don't know what the point of these guys are. I never paid attention to them once when playing, and that's pretty much how I feel about this game in general. No one really pays attention to it. Donkey Kong Country 3 is still a really strong game that's a ton of fun to play through, but it didn't leave as big of an impact as the previous two games. But with that said, I still really enjoyed this game, and I do think it's an overall better experience compared to the first game. As I said previously, the first Donkey Kong Country game was a revolution for the Donkey Kong franchise, but just like a lot of games, it was completely outdone by its sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy Kong's Quest. I've heard so many people talk about how much they love Donkey Kong Country 2, and after finally playing through it for myself, I totally understand why. In this adventure, you play as Diddy Kong along with his girlfriend, Dixie Kong. Dixie Kong actually made her debut in this game and has the ability to glide through the air, which is pretty awesome. The levels in this game are so much better than the first one. Not only do they feel a lot more refined than the first game, but they also come with way more unique themes and gimmicks. There are levels where you're climbing around a pirate ship, riding on a balloon in a volcano, sticking to the walls inside a giant beehive, and having to constantly hit switches while riding around a carnival. Also, remember the animal buddies from the other two games? Well, not only do you get to ride on them throughout the stages, there are some levels where you just straight up play as the animal buddies, and that opens up so many doors for unique level design. I will say, there are still a few levels in here that are kinda bullshit just like the last game, but those stages are much fewer than before. The boss battles are much better than the first game too, and can actually be pretty difficult if you don't know what you're doing. We also get some cameos from other Nintendo characters, and you can try to get a higher score than them by collecting all of the DK coins that are hidden throughout the world. While Donkey Kong Country 2 isn't the best game in the series in my opinion, I totally see why others think it is. It is a huge step up from the first Country game, and is just a really solid game in general. Donkey Kong Country was a huge success on the Super Nintendo, but after that third game, we didn't get a new entry in the series for years. All we got were some ports on the Game Boy Advance, and that was it. But then, in 2010, the series rose from the dead with one of the greatest comebacks in all of gaming, Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Wii. I remember playing this game when I was younger and having an absolute blast, and it still holds up all these years later. Now, right off the bat, I do need to talk about the controls. If you haven't played this game on the Wii, many of the actions you have to perform are done by shaking the Wii remote. A lot of people took issue with this, and I can sort of see why. But for me personally, I never had a problem with the controls, and I was able to enjoy the game just fine, and enjoy it I did, because DKC Returns is one of the greatest 2D platformers I've ever played. The levels are so much fun to blaze through and are filled to the brim with cool ideas. You have these levels that take place in the dark, ones with a bunch of sinking fossils, one where you're getting chased by a bunch of spiders, and one with a bunch of machinery that plays to the beat of the song. This game also introduces the rocket barrel levels, which these levels are worth it for the music alone. Diddy Kong makes his return, and he can give Donkey Kong the ability to glide in the air for a bit. Rambi the Rhino appears in a few levels and absolutely demolishes anything in his path. Also, remember the Kong letters from the last few games? Now, collecting them is actually worth something as they unlock new challenge levels in each world, and god damn, these stages are hard. Not unfair, just really hard. And on top of that, each level has a set of puzzle pieces you can go for, and these unlock various art pieces that you can gawk at. And if you thought that was it, well, a few years later, this game got ported to the 3DS with brand new levels, and it uses standard button controls. And by the looks of it, we're about to get the definitive version of this game on Nintendo Switch with Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. But even disregarding all the re-releases, Donkey Kong Country Returns is an amazing game with so much to love about it, but there's still one more to go. Remember how I just said Donkey Kong Country Returns was one of the greatest 2D platformers I've ever played? Well, what if I were to tell you that the final game on this list is straight up the greatest 2D platformer of all time? A game that puts all of the other country games to shame and is one of my favorite video games of all time. And that game is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. It's not often that I describe a game as a masterpiece, but holy shit, this game absolutely deserves that title. In this game, Donkey Kong and the family have been blown away from their home island, and they have to explore multiple islands to take it back. The game thankfully uses standard button controls, which automatically makes it better than DKC Returns. Though, despite being on the Wii U, it doesn't use the gamepad in any creative ways. But you know what? If that means the game can be as good as it is, I'll take it. Instead of just one partner, Donkey Kong can swap between multiple partners, all of which have special abilities. Diddy Kong can glide through the air, Dixie Kong can gain a bit of height, and Cranky Kong can bounce on spikes and other objects. I love having these abilities, and they make playing through the levels way more fun. Speaking of levels, oh my God, the levels in this game are absolutely fantastic. Tropical Freeze has the most peak level design I've ever seen in a video game, and all of the stages are filled to the brim with variety. You have ones where you fly through a mountain filled with cheese, run through a forest fire in the savannah, bounce off jello cubes, climb a mountain during an avalanche, and so many others. Also, I haven't really mentioned the music in these games that much, but hot damn, this game's soundtrack slaps so hard. We also have the return of the puzzle pieces and Kong letters, which basically do the same thing as they did in Country Returns. And if you have the Switch version of Tropical Freeze, you have the ability to play as Funky Kong. I f***ing love Funky Kong. He's so incredibly overpowered, but that makes him a joy to play as. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze truly is a masterpiece. If you haven't played this game yet, you are missing out. It's one of the greatest video games I've ever played, and is easily the best Donkey Kong Country game of all time. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then make sure to give it a like, and let me know down in the comments which of these games is your favorite. Also, make sure to subscribe so you can see more videos like this in the future. Have a great day, stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one.